Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. How are you all doing out there, gang? Good. Now, with a daily tech podcast such as this and a solopreneur of sorts, I simply don't have the bandwidth to do as much as I would like with this show and promote it too heavily. But I recently came across somebody called Christoph Trapp, and he has a new book out and a website called the Authentic Storytelling Project. And he was talking about how live streaming can help dramatically increase the audience of a podcast. And this really caught my attention. And I've got to be honest with you, I do have access to LinkedIn Live and all those other streaming platforms, but I've avoided doing a live stream. I feel a little bit uneasy about it. And let's face it, I have a great face for radio and podcasting, so I've never really explored live streaming. But today I wanted to speak with an expert about that. And I don't want to reveal too many spoilers, so buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to the US, where Christoph is waiting to speak with us about the Authentic Storytelling Project and also his new book called Going Live. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Hey, Neil, thanks for having me. Christoph Trapp here. I am a content marketer, grew up in journalism, but then, of course, like many of us journalists, moving over into marketing. And at some point, we started calling it content marketing. And today, I focus on content performance. If you're going to go out there and create content, seriously, it has to perform. And of course, what that means has many, many different definitions, depending on industry, depending on what you do, depending on how big your audience is. And currently, I'm really definitely on the podcasting. Thanks for having me on a podcast. Podcasting and live streaming bandwagon. And I see so many companies jump out there and do podcasts. And it's a hard area to break into. So one of the ways I kind of currently focused on is how do you improve your podcast through live streaming your podcast? And of course, that's what my latest book is about. But I practice what I preach. I go live, a few times a week.
Love that. And of course, to make your content perform better, if you're a podcast, a journalist, whatever it is you're doing, you're going to need a little bit of technology to bring those live streams to life. So to begin with, I've got to ask, where did your love of technology come from? And what was it that put you on this path that you're on today?
Well, that's a very generous way of putting that, Neil. Sometimes I love technology and sometimes not so much. But today, everything is working fine so far, right? So, but when we use technology correctly and when we find the right technology, it can really help us make our lives easier. I'll give you an example. I have my office set up in a way. It's like I'm comfortable. I'm using the right technology. I'm using the right tools. I'm using the right setups. And it's really important to figure out what that means to you and how do you get there and how do you integrate it all? And then also, what are the tools you're going to use? And here's my quick story when it comes to technology. You're going to buy a software, whatever it is. I don't care if it's for $30 or $30,000. There's going to be three things you don't like. And you're going to spend, if you don't pay attention, you're going to spend your two years trying to find a solution that fixes those three things. And then you buy a new solution, which has three new things that bother you. And it's an ongoing thing. So just keep that in mind. Technology is never perfect unless you build it yourself, but it's unbelievable. Think about it. You're in the UK. I'm west of Chicago in Marion, Iowa. And we're just recording we're meeting in a studio. Who still has studios today? It's just things are getting easier and easier, and it's becoming more and more important that you have good content.
It really is. And it blows my mind as well that me and you are having a conversation now between two completely different time zones, and there'd be people listening in 170 countries, which completely blows my mind. But over to the kind of work that you're doing here, especially in a world of digital storytelling, which I think we all do now, no matter what platform we use. What is the Authentic Storytelling Project? Because I saw about your latest book, and that's one of the reasons I invited you on today. But for people that are hearing about it for the first time, can you just possibly set the scene on that?
Yeah, so really the Authentic Storytelling Project officially launched in like 2013. And the reason I launched that as an official site is because companies are all doing marketing to some extent, one way or another, right? Even if they don't do official marketing, they still do marketing face-to-face, etc. But you have to tell authentic stories. And you can't just say, we want to make money. Everybody wants to make money. Stop saying it. Seriously, nobody says, oh, we don't want to make money. Like I've never heard that before. So, but you have to tell your stories, your authentic stories. What are you about? Why are you unique? What's your personality? And I'm telling you, when there is 10 companies that all do pretty much the same thing, the stories you tell makes a difference, and you stay in front of people. And that's when you look at especially technology. I mean, certainly you've seen Scott Brinker's, 89,000 companies on his, that's not how many it is. It's like 8,000, I think, or 7,500 or something. But how are you going to stand out? You're not going to stand out by having one little widget that's slightly better than another company. You're going to stand out by, having a better brand and a better customer experience, certainly when you get into it. But you have to tell those authentic stories, and you have to do it all the time, everywhere. So when people tell you, be more deliberate, do less, yeah, whatever, like that, seriously, be deliberate, but don't necessarily do less. Do the right things and do them everywhere you can.
And I think the content that both you and I create is obviously around our own personalities. And I think it's often very, very different for business leaders, and so much more difficult because we all listen to similar personalities, whether it be podcasts or live streams, but we're not necessarily going to download a Nike podcast, for example, because it's a big brand. And do you really want to listen to that? So for business leaders that are listening, how can they hop on this trend too and use live streaming to their advantage, but without coming across too salesy?
Well, I mean, I would definitely download a Nike podcast if it was an interesting topic. And the topic could be, running tips or wearing or working at home. I mean, think about it. Actually, this is not a Nike podcast, but I'm wearing Under Armour slippers, at home all the time because my feet hurt when I was just wearing nothing, when I was just wearing, going barefoot or with my socks. So there's topics that any brand can talk about because any brand solves the problem. And then business people need to get over themselves. Like they can have personality. Who says they can't? That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. And I know where it comes from because we want to be formal. And this is the PR side speaking. And today you got to have some personality. I mean, it depends on what it is. Like, for example, I'm not a big fan of any personality that swears online. I think it's usually kind of off-putting, but if that's what they choose to do you. So absolutely, there can be any brand that can do it. Now, does Nike truly, honestly need podcasting? I don't know. I mean, I'm going to buy their shoes no matter what, I guess. But again, it can help them, right? It can help them stay in front of people. And certainly in a highly competitive field, and especially a company that's up and coming, it's another way to get in front of people.
It really is. And at the moment, it does seem that everyone from individuals to businesses all want to launch their own podcast. And if they're lucky, I've worked with many people and they seem to have very high expectations. But if they're very lucky, they will reach 10 episodes and then give up because, hey, they don't have that viral hit on their hands that they had envisioned. So do you have any tips on how listeners can better build their audience?
Actually, Neil, so the official number is 7. Most podcasts give up after 7 podcast episodes, which is crazy because, I mean, you have thousands, I have hundreds, and I didn't see any success until, 50, 80, 100 into it. And so, but when you start a new podcast, it's a brand new network. So you're going to have 10 to 30 downloads. Like, let's be realistic. And the way you can totally push that number up quickly, I mean, you can do paid strategies, you can do other things to push it up too. But what I would recommend as the first step, if you live stream the recording, and I actually brand my live streams as this is a live recording of the Business Storytelling Podcast. See what I mean? I'm trying to remind people it's a podcast. It's not just a live stream. And you push it to all the different channels. where you already have audience. That's LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, wherever, if you're on Twitch, go to Twitch. And you already immediately get hundreds of views right there. So that's how you kind of push up the performance. And that's why I recommend that. And then the other trick I found out actually maybe a month or so ago, it's relatively recently, you can schedule your live streams. So now the post that announces the live stream, and then the live stream plays in that post, gets another few hundred views. So now I'm talking hundreds as opposed to 12.
Yeah. And I spoke, one of the things I often say is, I spoke to someone recently and they said they only had 400 downloads a month of their podcast. And I said, wait a minute, take a look outside your window now and in your town centre. Imagine that there are 400 people queuing up to go into a venue just to listen to you speak. And it's incredibly valuable, isn't it? That kind of attention. But I think so often people get get too distracted by dreams of 10, 20, 30,000 downloads, where if you've got 400 or 500 people waiting on your every word every month, that's incredibly valuable, isn't it?
It's true. And also you need to remember how big is your actual audience. So for example, Ben Smith has a website where he talks about like folklore music, like the fiddle and those kind of things. And that is not my area at all. And I said to Ben, Ben, how many people do this? And he said like 50,000. So guess what? If Ben ever gets to, let's say, 70,000 viewers on his website, he probably has the market covered, right? Because Neil, you and I probably are not going to read his articles or watch his videos, right? Unless you play the fiddle. I don't know you well enough yet, but so you have to remember how big is your audience. So if you're in B2B and you're selling, let's just make up an example, a big piece of construction equipment, and you do content marketing around, construction companies, you're not going to have 2 million people watch that. There's only, I don't know, 1,000 buyers, maybe less. So you have to keep that in mind too, industry specific.
Absolutely. And something else I think that many new podcasters forget, or live streamers, that they could have 20, 30 videos under their belt and that content has just gone and forgotten about. But there are so many different ways to repurpose that content and bring it to life. So from the kind of work that you're doing, what are the best ways you've found to repurpose content?
Well, so usually the model I use is I go live. Yeah. Well, first of all, I promote it, right? I schedule it. So that's already, you get stuff out of there. Make sure you have some kind of link, some kind of call to action. And then I go live. Then we have the discussion. I go to as many channels as possible. Currently, I focus on Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Amazon Live. Amazon Live is definitely my newest favorite baby, quite frankly. And it's an interesting platform, especially if there's something you can sell. So for example, I just have my books down there. I got all the equipment, that people can see on screen, my mic, my light, my chair. And so that's kind of interesting. I never talk about those things other than on podcasts like this, but people still click on them because they see me sitting in the chair and using the mic. And then I use that same content I put on the podcast channels. The podcast usually publishes a few weeks later, just so there's a little bit of a delay. We can't promote everything everywhere at the same time. So I usually use that to promote basically the same content again. And then I take that content and I turn it into an article. Sometimes it's a new article. Sometimes I update an existing article. Sometimes I don't do an article, depending on the topic. If it was super timely, I did an article. I guess I did do an article on that one. It just, you have to kind of look into the specific situation, but definitely throw your content a parade. And if you're only using content in one location, usually it's not a good thing. Now, you have to pick your battles, right? So if you have a daily podcast, you're not going to write an article daily. Like, let's be honest, it's just too much. You have to pick. So you might do one article a week, or maybe you do one article every 2 weeks. So you have to pick your battles. Don't be so black and white. We're living in a world of gray, right? So take these as guardrails, but don't take them as you have to do this to be successful. Finally, your content needs to be somewhat evergreen if possible. Sometimes it can't be, and sometimes that's okay. One of my best performing episodes ever was about me talking about a new feature in Canva. And nobody has listened to that in, I don't know, a long time, right? But it performed really well because it was brand new. Nobody else was talking about it. And then people listened to it. But for the most part, talk about things that have a little bit more shelf life, because people go back and people also find these episodes because they're shown as related episodes and other podcasts, Spotify and other places. So, the more evergreen you can be when it makes sense, don't force it. But when it makes sense, can be helpful.
I completely agree. Fantastic advice there. And as you're on the podcast today, I also believe you've got a new book out called Going Live, which will be incredibly appealing to anyone that's thinking of going live in some format, but just got a few reservations and need a little bit more help and advice from someone that's been there and done it before. So can you tell me more about the book and ultimately what you want the readers to walk away with?
So basically the book, anybody who wants to go live can read it, but it's really targeted towards the people that are doing a podcast or that are thinking about a podcast. All kinds of companies are talking about it. And especially when you have a new show, this is important. When you have an older show, you can still do it. But I wouldn't do it, a couple times a day, or maybe not even every day, even though there are people who do live streams every day. I don't know how they do it, but it is. So you and I are sitting here. Right. And I don't know if you're sitting, but I'm sitting, and it's actually kind of relaxed. I don't have to be on camera. I can look at whatever. I don't have to look better. It's just, it's more relaxed than being on camera for sure. I don't have a light in my eyes. So, but it really can help you get more reach. So the way I typically do it, and the way I think is the easiest way to do it, is you set up the live stream. So for example, we met at 7. The live stream would typically be scheduled, let's say, for 7:08. I never schedule live streams to start at the top of the hour or the bottom of the hour. Here's the reason why. Because 7 a.m. is first thing in the morning for me, but you're at 1 o'clock p.m. right after lunch. Maybe you had a lunch meeting, right? Now you have to cut into the lunch meeting to be live because you have to show up early. So always give people some time to show up. And then there's plenty of tools out there that you can use. I currently use Switcher Studio on my iPad for the production, and then Restream helps me distribute it. You can also use Restream on its own. You can use StreamYard. There's probably others. And basically, it's the same what we're doing right now. You and I are having a conversation, except we're live and except we're on video. You don't have to start with video, quite frankly. You can just have a logo up and just have the audio. It's whatever, do what works. And then when I'm done, I automatically almost push the audio to Anchor. Anchor extracts the audio, and then I create the podcast. And I already have all the intro written, right? Because I already used that. So I just copy and paste. And then I schedule the podcast. So it's really, once you get into it, it's not that much more difficult than just recording audio. Now, as I mentioned, this is a little bit less stressful or a little bit more relaxed, I guess is a better term, than going on air. But, find the right cadence. And again, you can reach a lot more people, especially when you're just getting started.
And for anyone listening that is thinking of getting started, do you have a possible use case that you could share that would just bring everything that we've talked about today to life, and especially for how businesses, brands and individuals can just simply hit record, and when they've done that, what happens then? How far will it reach? And ultimately for the business leaders, what is the ROI of ventures like this? Because that's a hot topic too right now.
Yeah, so Vox Pop Me does that, for example, where I run content strategy there. It's a market research platform with video surveys. And that's what they do. Every week, the VP of marketing goes live and talks to an industry leader. This is another thing, as you know, when you get guests on the show, you don't have to fill all the time, right? Because they're talking too. It's a conversation. It's much easier. It's hard to have a conversation with yourself, as much as sometimes I like having solo podcasts. And then, they follow the model I just mentioned, but you have to get on a schedule. And so even at Vox Pop Me, we go live every week. I was on vacation a couple of weeks ago. So you know what we did? We did 2 the week before because we'll go on live every week. So when we can, we move it up. But you just kind of have to get into the rhythm. You have to commit to it. The time is becoming less and less important, quite frankly. I've seen success at all kinds of different times. So, especially like on Amazon, for example, there's very few people that are live in the mornings. So like that's a really good time to go live, like right now, And on other channels like Twitter, especially, we'll see what happens with Twitter and Periscope here at the end of March, which is, the day we're recording this a couple days out. But people watch on the replay. So don't forget about that too. And that's another reason why I don't push the podcast right away, because people are still watching the replay. So I don't want people to overthink it, even if they see all the posts.
And looking towards the future, what's next for you? Are there any tech trends in the industry that excite you, or anything else you can share with us today?
Well, I still believe there's a future in VR, virtual reality. And of course, what's interesting about that is, so right now when we do video, it's just us talking, right? Talking heads, basically. Every once in a while, I'll run a video, which you can do with Restream and Switcher. So I'm doing an April Fool's episode, and I'm playing a video from a keynote I gave in Berlin in 2017. But other than that, it's just you talking and you get some lower thirds. So I still think there's a future of VR. So you're sitting in your studio or whatever, and people can watch you in VR. Now, will anybody care? I don't know. I mean, there's not much to look at in here, honestly, so it's not that exciting. But the more exciting our studios get and the more there's to look at, that might be something worth exploring. If you're recording in some interesting location, or live stream from an interesting location, that might be worth exploring. And these VR cameras are $80, So I think something along those lines. I don't know what it is exactly. I have a VR headset and I hardly ever use it. I know where it is, but I haven't touched it in months. So VR content is still on the upswing and still early on. But, as everything, it's going to evolve. And, how will we use it at some point?
Well, I've loved chatting with you today. But for anyone listening who would like to find out more information about your book, or check out your website, or even contact you, what's the best starting point for that?
AuthenticStorytelling.net for sure. Also, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. If you like, don't send me a message saying you realized I'm human. Just let me know where you heard me. I'm happy to connect.
Well, like I said, I've loved about our conversation today, from hearing more about the Authentic Storytelling Project and learning more about how brands can use live streaming to their advantage, and of course your latest book as well, and on live streaming and where it's heading. So thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me today and just share some more details on that.
You bet. Thanks for having me. Cheers.
So like we were talking about in the conversation there, many brands are starting podcasts and then disappointed by the number of downloads. But having read about Christoph's work, one way to maximize podcasting is by live streaming your recordings to your existing social communities, such as Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and also remember other platforms too, such as the new Clubhouse, Twitter Spaces, and Amazon Live. So if anybody interested in why and how live streaming can give your brand a competitive edge, showcase your brand's authenticity and human side, I do recommend checking out Christoph's fourth book called Going Live. But over to you. Do you live stream? Have you had success? Have you not had success? Do you have a podcast? How's that going? I'd love to hear your stories. You hear mine often enough, but I want to hear yours too. So I'm going to put the microphone over to you. Email me directly, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk, where you'll find over 1,500 other interviews. But more than anything, I want to hear about your story and get your voice on this podcast too. So keep those messages coming in. A big thank you for listening as always. And I'll join you again tomorrow with another interview. But thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.